Thank you. Most of you, or some of you at least, know that I have moved again about a year ago. In fact, today is just an anniversary. Now I'm leading a department as well as a center and continue to push forward this area of research. Like this afternoon's section is actually very well thought through and put together. I have to thank John and Cecile about this. Basically, it traced back the story. I want to tell a story that essentially this is something that I learned too over the pandemic, is that what we do, we really need to learn how to communicate better. And this is something now in a leadership position, I think about this issue more and more. This whole afternoon is something that we have been thinking about doing literally almost for 2 decades. Since some of the works that we presented earlier, when I become a full professor in 2005 at UCLA, at that time I started to think that essentially for what we do, we don't have any burden or responsibility to continue to get your tenure. It's secure. How can you do something totally different based on what you have done before? At that point, most of you already know some of the works that from the Nurses' Health Study and the Health Professional Follow-Up Study and those Harvard cohorts. In fact, I have contributed a few in the Harvard cohorts in looking at diet, particularly in the carbohydrate area with cardiometabolic outcomes. Now, doing what we do in human studies, particularly in epidemiology, is extremely important to identify the right population. Have the leader of the nurses' health studies study nurses' husbands, then this study would be a flop. Okay, it's not going to be possible. And for us to do science to a large extent is about doing measurement. So if you cannot measure things, you cannot study. But nurses' health study are a very internally valid and dedicated group of people in the United States. So when the genesis, my mentor, Warwick, developed the whole food frequency questionnaires and assessed that, it is by far still the best instruments to do large, high-quality prospective cohort that generate the kind of relationship. That relationship, but in my view, is still the first step. We have to go forward, but we cannot do trial. We know doing trial is extremely difficult. In fact, we do have examples to do trial, which is the Women's Health Initiative that I started out as junior faculty at Harvard Medical School, working with Joanne Manson, and we get involved in that. So that's what make me feel like that. While another aspect of it is to look at a more nationally representative samples, not only in the United States, but across the globe. But at that time, in the 2000, I can tell you, at least in the American academic environment, it's actually very encouraging to do that kind of work. So we were actually lucky. The way that I wanted to acknowledge this slide, it's all the people who actually get this work. We actually set a enhanced study in a country, in Ghana, with a colleague, with support. Owusu is the president of the Ghanaian Cardiology Association, and Jet Li was now the director of the Cardiometabolic Center in my province in Guangdong. At the time, he was training with me. So, and then we actually were able to get funding to start the enhanced replication with the arguments that the understandings of biology principle is that variation and interaction is the key. You cannot just look at one single population. If you truly wanted to understand the biology, it's variation and interaction. That two principles must guide our study design. So same argument. Also, we got an R1 working with two of my colleagues, one at Eduardo Simons at the CDC, and Paulo Latufo, who was trained at the Brigham when I was a junior faculty and now is the president of USP, University of Sao Paulo, where they set up a cohort. So we were able to secure 2-hour ones to basically do 3 populations, one in Africa, one in Brazil, and one in China. But unfortunately, I highlighted in red here, after more than 15 years of work, we collected all the data, but every one of this study now is just being shut down. In fact, we just submitted, it's about picking apples. We just submitted in fact, we submitted about a year ago, get a very good score, just being told no longer you are allowed to send subcontract to any other country. Now, this is, again, not basically money from other countries to us. It's we, again, American, setting up shops in different countries to help them and do this kind of works, which has been the traditionally global health practice in the name of or following the principles of justice. But I have always argued that it's not only for social justice purposes, it's simply for doing the best possible science. And I highlight here some of the people get involved. Like you already hear Professor Xiang just gave the very first talk. Professor Yang and I have known each other for a long time, since 1998 when we met faithfully with some of you in this room, if you still remember, in beautiful southern France, with Jenny, the city called Bordeaux. That's how we develop our friendship now, almost 3 decades now. So what I'm going to talk a little bit about today is really this one. The next 2 talk is this one that I'm going to talk a little bit about how we do this in North America using data generating from the CDC, another institution very close to my heart. And European data that under the leadership of Livia, we collaborated with Antonio Chikopoulos too. That's what you see when we reach out to Antonio, and she told us that she is actually already doing some of this work. And with Carlos, doctoral student who have spent the past year at my new shop in Orange County. So you can see the goal I really wanted to just put everything together so that we can have a more consistent and powerful understanding of this very important, in my view, dietary carbohydrate. And there's in some area of the work that related to dietary carbohydrate is the balance of mineral that David was alluded a little bit, that unfortunately I don't have time to talk about it. That's another major area of my group's research now. Just very quickly, this is for the past 3 days, you already heard about this. This is a slide somewhat old, and thanks to the Angus, son and father team, that we collaborated on a chapter on behalf of the WHO for the 2005 or 2006 that dietary expert panel discussion at that time. I think it's still very ably describing why I think it's so important for glycemic index. Essentially, there's so many factors in the whole ecosystem, from the food being produced in the field to actually on our table being consumed and digest and absorbed. At the end of the day, it really is thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of factors, you already heard this morning, that would affect that. But I also agree the rapidly available glucose or slowly available glucose that calcify chemically in an enzymatic manner that the Angus team have first developed and popularized is very useful from an industry perspective because it does help you to calcify better. But unfortunately, it is hard to connect it to in human in vivo, and that's what GI is all about, I think. So in my view, GI is a bioassay that incorporates the concept of bioaccessibility as well as bioavailability. So I don't have to repeat this again. I think most of you can appreciate it, although still in the literature we are still sometimes struggling when we have to communicate to colleagues in the field of nutrition. Many of them either think that it's unmeasurable or you have done enough. What's next? So we are in a catch-22 situation. So very quickly, this is the Harvard cohort, some of the works that I was involved in under Walter's supervision as a doctoral student in mid-1990s. We look at the nurses' data, it's very clear, the picture actually as well already mentioned a little bit, and subsequently with more consistent updated analysis, we see comparing the two extreme quintiles of dietary glycemic load. And you know that I also use the term, tend to distinguish the glycemic load at the food level and put a small d in front of GL to define it as a dietary level of a glycemic load. And it does actually interacting with some baseline metabolic status, in this case, insulin resistant, higher BMI as the best indicator at a population level to describe insulin resistance, meaning that of those who have insulin resistance, they are much more likely to suffer from a high glycemic load diet. In fact, we did also, this is from two studies, one from the nurses, a small sample of them, and another from the Women's Health Study, which is a trial. It's also, Joanne Manson is the PI. We also look at some, Julie Bering and Joanne Manson, the two of them are the PI, to see, in fact, at that time, we already picked up these biomarkers, both the information as well as the most consistent biomarkers of fasting triglyceride, as well as HDL. Okay, those are the very high quality, responsive, dedicated participants in this kind of large cohort studies. So for those who really want to embrace the challenging opportunities in population study, this really is the key, but it's not easy to find a wide population to do study. So I'm already put forward the arguments why it's so important, aside from doing this high prospective selected population and do extensive follow-up and repeated measurements of their dietary and phenotypes, but it is also important from the perspectives of variation as well as interaction. One must to go out there and build this kind of study. In fact, that's what we set out to do. And I mentioned about the CDC and Harvard, both institutions are very close to my heart. And, but right now it's under tremendous attack. And now I wanted to use these papers that, and in fact, I was trained, probably one of the first, if not the first physician being trained at the time directly at the CDC and the EIS and preventive medicine program, with the hope that to build the kind of surveillance in the future to also do global health. And in addition to my busy traveling around the countries investigating outbreaks in the early 1990s, I also worked with some of my mentors, are truly dedicated billions scientists. Both are captain and both are retired, and the rest of the folks in the division, in fact, the entire division was being eliminated just this past weekend, unfortunately. But the reason why I want to show this is the enhanced data, and one of my job then at the time is to not only look at this data, but set up some of the surveillance systems, such as the behavioral risk surveillance system, which does represent and go through some of the more rigorous selection process. So just to show the very basic, in fact, this is basic, it's also at a national level, I would submit that the very first prospective study that directly linked weight change with diabetes. In fact, we have predicted, because those data then at enhanced baseline measurements in the 80s, then you can already portend this epidemic that we now all experiencing around the globe now. In fact, prediction is difficult, but we were pretty wide at target there. So at that time, I also working, because very familiar with the enhance, thinking about doing the glycemic index measurements and glycemic load using the enhanced baseline data. Now, everybody knows AIs now, but it is some of the really leading thinkers that I have the privilege of interacting with, studying at Harvard School of Public Health. Even in the mid-1990s, in the classes I've been interacting with Alec Walker and Jamie Robbins, they are already teaching us how to use neural networks and see if we can do things that way. Or, obviously, using CPU is nearly impossible to do. But we were already at that time talking about using GPU to maybe able to do this faster. But suffice it to say that we did work together again with my very good friend and colleague, Earl Ford, did this study. So really it's the first study to show a direct relationship between a high glycemic index diet and a suppressed level of HDL and a reverse of triglyceride. And then that was, think about 25 years later, fast forward. This paper published now almost 2 years ago now. We finally were able to take advantage of the computational resources to map literally 2 million food codes, working with a very talented team, Karen Della Corte and her husband, Denise Della Corte, which we met in this conference. Was this conference 2 conferences ago, I think? 2 conferences ago. Then we actually finished this project. And I would just introduce both Angela and I will talk, sort of like this talk is actually in conception. This is more focused on North America, the enhanced data, and Angela will talk about the Mediterranean regions of the data that she has been collecting and basically trying to use the same kind of methodologies. Really quickly, we first have to extract all the USDA data, food codes from enhanced, a total of 49,205 adults that participated through the 20 years of 20 cycles of, it's not really follow-up, but 20 cycles of consistent measure. Completed 24-hour record and a really abbreviated food frequency questionnaire. And dietary intake, it's containing, I said, you know, we classify and map it over 8,000 food items. But if you break down the code, it's actually close to 2 million of them. And in fact, more than 2 million. So once this is based on the USDA, the database, and link up with the enhanced, which it won't be possible in the past, but thanks to in fact, ChatGPT at that time just come up that way, the way that we pull out those data and then have to integrate it and link up it with some of the GI tables like Jenny's group and several others in Europe are maintaining, and also including some of the Asian foods as well. Just very quickly to show the way that we do this is that basically the paper published in 2017 by Google scientists, it's just a twist of the technique. Fundamentally, it's still a neural network, not really theoretical advancement at all, but it's just a very clever way and take advantage of the superpower of GPU. And this, at that time, is called the text embedding ADA2, but now I think it's up to 4, 5 now from OpenAI. Basically converting words, word by words, embedding those models and convert it into different kind of vectors. And Denise is the physicist turned into to help his wife, and he has interest and the technical know-how to do this very efficiently. And just very quickly, I don't want to bore you all the details. This is the latest over the summer that they spent a week in beautiful Southern California, and even make this much more accessible and share with the greater scientific communities on the web, that this whole methodology is out there and you could even apply to your national survey data. to come up with a dietary GI and dietary GL variable, including some of the energy adjustment, the methodologies that Walter developed, the residual adjustment method for total energy control. Anyway, I'm just going to be very fast to show you what the data is. You already see this. Some of them you already see this. This slightly, Walter, that seemed a little bit different from when I first looked at in the nurses in terms of the top contributor for GL. Again, this is a much broader and diverse population. The top one is actually soft drink, really is. And this population obviously is at a lower socioeconomic class than the nurses and health professionals. What's interesting is look at the trend. For the first time, we all sort of like speculating, but never really have data to do this. But this is like, again, for 20 years, we now can look at this data, and you can see the change of the dietary GI in the US adult population is indeed gradually coming down, okay? Both GI and GL. And does seem to have some differences, like, for example, sex is very important. I can't emphasize it more. There is a strong biological basis suggesting that the same kind of diet, okay, depends your sex, your body's response to it on your metabolic outcome of interest may be different. It would be different. And then some of the data you see here, so obviously it naturally goes without saying our next step is to make the application easier. Everybody can go to the website or the app to download the data and then put it into your own app or even integrate it with your Apple AI to interpret whatever the data you come about. And epidemiologically, we can also, as my former speaker mentioned now, to relate it in your established cohort, the outcome of interest, one by one, with, and to look at some of the potential causal relationship between dietary GI and dietary GL and outcome of interest. And then, needless to say, is to provide a really evidence-based guidance for public health policies as well as individual dietary guidance. So some of the ongoing works, as you know, this LLM, large language model, really for AI is undisputably, in my view, established is a great equalizer, so to speak. All the language barriers or whatnot disappear now. But in terms of whether or not it can be generated to be causally interpreted, some of those associations of interest that you cannot be verified in controlled randomized trial, and thus one have to think from a counterfactual perspective, and that still have to rely on our carbon-based chips here, rather than the silicon-based chips. Okay, so while the key is to extend that to other databases in the country, and then you see now our Chinese colleagues is developing, and the sharing data is a tremendous effort. I mentioned earlier that our ones that generating the data, I can use a couple of minutes Angela's time because our talk is the same. I'm going to introduce Angela this if it's okay. But anyway, so this is ongoing work, and then we are going to do, Angela is going to do a super capable and excellent doctoral students under Carlos Sharp, and she's a trained dietitian, and who you can see some of the work that she showed for the countries of Mediterranean regions that participate in national survey. And maybe next time, like this is my new group. We are building, established last July, a brand new school of population and public health, and then also the school-wide, campus-wide center devoted to global cardiometabolic health and nutrition. And you all welcome to beautiful Mediterranean regions of America.